Hi, I'm Jenny Walterman, and this is my case study presentation for EDL851 Module 12. This case summary involves a few people that are itemized by name and some others that are not mentioned by name. But for this scenario, the principal is mentioned but not named, and it's assumed that I will be assuming that role, and then Miss Stevens, a teacher in my building, and then the students of Miss Stevens are a consideration for sure because everything we do in the building does affect our students, and so how can this situation not affect them? So, key facts in this case is that the principal has been conducting evaluations prior to the deadline for submissions, has been in and out of classrooms, did several in one day, and most of them went very well. The one exception to that was that Miss Stevens, who has been observed several times, had unsatisfactory results, and it seemed that she was struggling with her classroom management, and her content delivery was conducted in a manner that it did not allow for student engagement and attention, and so there was problems with student behavior and attention and focus. She is very intelligent and knows her subject well, but struggles to engage and motivate her students to want to learn or have any influence over the students' classroom behavior or get them to engage in any kind of conversation or discussion about the content other than just rote recitation. The principal has made several observations regarding Miss Stevens in her class, and a large amount of noise is audible outside the classroom upon approach to the classroom, and I can hear students talking, moving around the room, and they do settle once the principal enters the room, but still continue to display complete lack of respect for Mrs. Stevens throughout the learning moments. On Thursday, after the visitation conference regarding classroom evaluations, Ms. Stevens appears to be irritable. She's hostile to any suggestions that I might make and difficult to communicate with. I suggested involving students more to increase motivation to learn, and Ms. Stevens became defensive, countering that she tries to motivate the students and involving them in informal discussions, but they just don't want to be involved, and there's nothing she can do about that. And explains that there's no conclusive proof that achievements depends on student involvement. So she's kind of rejecting my suggestions and the supposition behind the initial thoughts about my evaluation. So, going away from that experience, the principal is discouraged, and Miss Stevens just seemed inflexible to any kind of evaluative conversation that would be a learning experience to prompt growth in her as a professional educator. And the principal left the discussion without any progress being made, and Miss Stevens would not concede any inadequacy in her teaching, which is a problem, the lack of being able to be teachable. And so, as the principal is considering all this, starting to wonder, is there any purpose in pursuing working further with her in the building? And but in spite of that, decides to go ahead and do one more evaluation visit before submitting a report that would be a negative report on behalf of Miss Stevens. So, principal decides to visit the room again the following Monday with no noticeable improvement in the class. Ms. Stevens continues to struggle to engage students in yet another class discussion, but there was too much teacher lecturing and too much teacher instruction with not enough time allowed for students to participate other than delivering that rote recitation that was mentioned previously. Uh, so the principal leaves without saying anything, just because out of a lack of anything positive to say, goes ahead and just checks out of the room and decides that um, Ms. Stevens should not be renewed for a contract for next year because if she is recommended for renewal, then she will become tenured and it will be very unable or very difficult to remove her from the building, and I would be stuck with her for a long time. And the principal completes the teacher evaluation, summarizing all the inadequacies, recommending the non renewal, And prior to submitting to the superintendent, wants to discuss this in person with Miss Stevens. So puts a note in her mailbox requesting an after-school meeting to discuss the evaluation prior to submission to the superintendent. So at the meeting, Miss Stevens ignores the principal's attempts to set her in a calming manner and to set a tone that's calm and productive, collaborative. She looks at the evaluation form and what the principal has said about her teaching, throws it back on the desk, stating that it's inaccurate and unfair. She states that she did not deserve the low ratings and is much better than the form indicates at teaching, and she states that she may have not done her best, but it's equally the principal's fault because his presence always upsets her and affects the behavior of her students. I just like to say I know how to spell the word presence and that it's different than a gift present, and I missed that spelling error. And my pride and my ability with English makes me pause and say that to you. Anyway, Mrs. Stevens also states that the principal has no basis for critiquing her teaching because the principal has never taught the class and no one has ever really offered any practical or tangible ideas on how to better engage her students, and that she hasn't received any supervision yet due to lack of proper teaching and training. And she leaves and says that she will fight this evaluation and rating of her performance because it's not fair. And if she does have a problem, it's the school that failed her and not the other way around. And they didn't provide her training. Okay, so let's talk about some of the case issues here. So, some potential legal issues is it true that there's been inadequate training and supervision for untenured teachers by the district or the supervisors? In Kansas, there's a state mandate that new teachers are required to have mentor experience where they are being developed in their craft and in their profession and provided opportunities to grow and learn different ways to teach. And so that would be a legal issue if we have not, as a district, set up an appropriate mentorship program that meets the state requirements for that. And then she could form a formal complaint or bring legal action against the district, and that would definitely be a legal problem. And the principal is displaying potential bias, maybe, by not making efforts to help Mrs. Stevens in spite of her difficult personality. So we are called to, as leaders, to try to equip our employees to be as successful as possible. And I don't know if that's necessarily a legal issue. Maybe that belongs over in the ethical, but I think it could be if every time he engages with Miss Stevens, there is a conflict or a feeling of negative bias towards Miss Stevens. Some ethical conflicts: Miss Stevens resists constructive feedback, deflects any blame away from herself, doesn't appear to be teachable. The principal does not try to follow through with various approaches to evaluate and observe in a more amenable setting, just continues to practice the same observation method of the walkthrough, which seems to be unscheduled. And she, based on some of the stuff she said, does not know that it's going to happen and indicated that it makes her nervous and sets her on edge. And then her students respond to her tone, and so that's a potential ethical issue, to not try to provide an environment that meets any kind of mental health need or emotional stability need if the employee is struggling with the evaluative method. And then ethical conflict number 3 I see as a lack of proper feedback and teacher training by the supervisor in the district. Is, how are we giving our feedback and how are we doing our evaluations? And is the supervisor slash mentor being trained to provide feedback as well? And in what mode are we offering that that is more constructive, so that there is action items that go along with the feedback to prompt growth and response to that. So my one sentence statement about this case is that Ms. Stevens, an untenured teacher in my building, has had unsatisfactory evaluations after the past few classroom observations and has refused to accept my report findings and recommendation of non-renewal, stating that she hasn't been properly trained or helped and I intimidate her when I walk in the room. So a little bit more about the case facts and exploring what we do and don't know. So Ms. Stevens, a teacher, has issues with the classroom management and struggles. I'm just going to uncover my note standard there. Okay. Ms. Stevens, a teacher, has issues with classroom management. She struggles with instructional methods that are engaging and prompting her students to get involved and have discussions. We know that much. We know she's argumentative with the principal when receiving feedback. And I would also say that that's an unknown. Why is she argumentative? Why is she not able to receive instruction? Is it something personal or is there more conflict? We just don't know. There's not a lot of information about her background or her tone within the building. And I think that those factors also need to be demonstrated. Is she working in an apartment where she is the only teacher of her subject? I kind of read this and assume that it is a middle school or secondary, high school level. So either maybe she could be working in a department where she's the only person that teaches her subjects, so she feels like an island, or she works in a department where there's several other teachers that teach the same thing she does, and maybe she isn't being, information isn't being shared with her on how to present information in a better format. Or what if everybody's doing it the same exact way and she's the only one being written up for it? These are just, if they're all using the same curriculum, and the other teachers are better at adapting than Miss Stevens, and she sees the curriculum and doesn't understand how to adapt it to make it more accessible to her students. So those are some unknowns for me that I have when I'm thinking about why is she resisting the critique and that struggle there. She denies her inadequacies are her fault due to lack of training and support. And I think as a principal, I would really want to dig into that and see, evaluate the uncomfortable untruths about what is happening there with the breakdown of training. For myself, the principal, I identified the problem with Miss Stevens' classroom, the noise and activity level, and the instructional style. I find her to be combative and difficult to talk to, and I resist speaking with her when I know it will bring about conflict. And I think I'm leaning towards recommending non-renewal, but I feel like also there's more unknowns that we need to know about this relationship. Why do I find it easier to just not speak and not give feedback than to talk to Ms. Stevens? Is there any kind of history or background there that I need to dig into and know more about? Students of Miss Stevens are misbehaving. They're noisy. They're out of their seats. They're not participating except for minor writing notes. And I think the unknown there is, is this a difficult class? Is this a difficult group? Do we have a couple of students in there that are always, they play off each other and it's like a perfect storm type situation? And has she had better reviews in the past with different groupings of students? And does she teach the same subject all day long? And could we go in and observe her in a different class with a different grouping of students and see if her teaching mode or her comfort level changes based on how the different group of students interact with her? Those are some unknowns I would want to know. The superintendent, my boss, will receive my report and potential fallout. And so I need to be mindful of how that reflects on me as a leader as well. That if she is saying she wasn't properly trained, that I make her nervous, that she feels like she can't talk to me, and she seems very combative, that could reflect poorly on me if I have not done everything I can to establish a collaborative learning environment for our teachers and students. This is an undisclosed location. We don't know where it is. We know it's in a school, but we don't know what state or city it's in. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm assuming this is middle school or upper primary grades, perhaps even high school. All exchanges between the principal and Ms. Stevens occur in that school building at the undisclosed location. Okay, in the program, We're doing observation walkthroughs. The principal conducts them by walking through, and the supervisor is assigned, but we don't know who that is. And there's no indication of what their input is and what kind of reporting they have done regarding any peer evaluations or any mentoring programs that the supervisor has gone through with Ms. Stevens. So potential damage to this, our reviewing our priorities, is that Ms. Stevens' non-renewal can affect her future ability to work and her morale or desire to continue in education, which I think is an all-time low in the nation. And so we need to be really mindful of how we provide feedback and information to teachers when we're trying to grow and stretch them as professionals, but also keep them in education if that's where they truly belong to be, for the betterment of our students. And then lack of training affecting her teaching confidence when observers are present. That could be an issue, and lack of ability to self-reflect and be teachable. That's one that I would really want to dig into, but I think we need to peel some other layers back first. And then the principal, potential lawsuit over lack of support and adequate training for a new-ish teacher. She's not tenured yet, so we don't know exactly how old or how experienced she is, but we know she's not tenured in our building. So even if she's not new to teaching, she's new to our district. Potential conflict with the teachers and superintendent over harsh evaluations of Ms. Stevens is a potential damaging factor, and potential for diminished confidence by the superintendent to hire and lead staff in me, a diminished confidence in myself as the principal to hire and lead staff. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, and then potential damage to the school, to the students, to our staff. Lack of equity in education due to Mrs. Stevens' troubles with effective teaching methods. And as I kind of intuited earlier, we don't know, is she the only person teaching this? Is there several people teaching it, but they're doing it different than her? And if we have different teachers teaching the same subject and executing it differently, we need to know why, because that's not very equitable, and our students have the right to have the same experience as their peers. And when possible, of course, there's always accommodations and things that need to happen, so we can't always be the same, but it should still be based on the same learning curriculum experience across the board if there's more than one teacher teaching the same content. And if the other teachers are teaching the same curriculum but delivering it in a different way, we need to dig into why there's a gap in that. Again, I'm kind of like intuiting, I'm like assuming some things here that may or may not be true, but we just don't know. We don't have all the facts. And then the lack of learning and self-regulation for appropriate behavior in the classroom. So that might be an issue. I have heard so many stories about certain grade levels that after the last 2 years of COVID, where maybe they spend a lot of time at home, they are not self-regulating. They don't know how to sit down and focus, and they're struggling in that regard. So, we need to look at some environmental issues and social emotional issues with the students themselves, and the potential damage of just assuming it's the teacher and not trying to address some of those issues in the classroom and help the teacher help the students, right? And so then our key stakeholders, Ms. Stevens, myself, the principal, Ms. Stevens, supervisor, mentor, who is unnamed, but we know exists, and the last question, could this conflict be damaging to the community? Absolutely. We need to indicate that we have equitable education in our building, that we have confidence in our teachers, that our teachers are lifelong learners and they're willing to grow, and they might make mistakes, but we're going to fall forward together and continue to lift up our teachers through continued learning, professional learning, and provide them with equitable training and support. So some potential solutions, I have 3 options. The first one would be to take no action and go ahead and let her file any complaint that she wants to and turn in my evaluation for non-removal and shake my hands of the whole situation. Option 2 would be to take a little bit of action, which is to try to speak with Ms. Stevens again about her lack of growth and performance in the classroom, try to ask for data samples of student work and demonstrations of learning growth. So if she's telling me that she maybe teaches differently when I'm in the room, to ask for some feedback in the form of data or student samples in order to help me piece together a story of what happens in our classroom at different times when I'm not present. The third option would be to request a meeting with Ms. Stevens and her supervisor, mentor, to discuss what instructional coaching has occurred first. So try to assess what's already happened and recognize that a leader's top task is to nurture talent. So I feel like that's really important, that we have to nurture growth and encourage learning and lifelong experiences in order to encourage our teachers to continue to be their best. And so possibly offering ideas for coaching, continued professional learning and professional development, perhaps reassign the supervisor if it's not a good match. Sometimes it's just not a good personality match, or that supervisor mentor takes on the additional teacher because they get an extra stipend, but they're really not in it to win it, right? They're not there for the betterment of the new teacher, and so they aren't really executing their duties very well. Propose and provide an alternate observation method. So indicate to Ms. Stevens, I've heard you. I make you uncomfortable when I come into the room. How else can we do this where I can do my job, which is, part of it is to evaluate, but also you can feel like you can get some constructive feedback that will help improve you in your profession without feeling anxiety and anxious, and then that pouring over into the students. So search for an observation method, an alternate evaluative tool that might be more conducive to Miss Stevens in her classroom, and then offer to work with Miss Stevens for 3 months and then reassess the evaluation. So lay out a very clear action plan of what we're going to do and be in agreement about that, and then circle back around, because we do need to make a decision that impacts the next year after we get a little bit more information. So the pros and cons of each one. For option one, taking no action, the pro is that taking no action is one option that would indicate lack of support for Miss Stevens and get her out of my building. Right? Not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. A con, and I see that as a con also, because I feel like that's not something I would ever do. But a con to that, taking no action would not provide learning opportunities for Mrs. Stevens, and it would potentially impact her future classrooms, her future students, the community, and even if they aren't in my building, it's still important, because I think our duty to students and growth does not stop at the property line. It's to all students, right? So pros and cons of option two is the pro is evaluating the data and student work would help review Ms. Stevens' job performance in a more scientific and objective manner if perhaps I may be having a personality conflict with her. And then an alternate way to discuss how things are going without sitting in the back of her room, which is obviously intimidating her. So that would be an alternate plan. A con to that would be Mrs. Stevens may become upset again, resistant to the help, resistant to sharing information and learning about her students' growth. Option three, the pros and cons. The pros are that it would provide an alternate evaluative method, such as peer evaluations, to put Mrs. Stevens more at ease and see if she is more relaxed and productive in a different setting. And then it also acknowledges her feelings of anxiety and the feelings of lack of support by myself and my supervisors. And then it provides a real and tangible teaching help for the betterment of Ms. Stevens, which by default will also help her students and the building. Cons to this may be that she may not improve, and now she is tenured and I'm stuck with her, right? And she may still resist any help from anyone, even if it's not from me. And so it could be just a whole bunch of excuses, and it doesn't matter what I do, she's just not going to comply. So that's a potential that I have to acknowledge. So my best option, you probably could tell from my explanations there of the different options, is that I think the third option is the best, where I would have a mentorship meeting with Ms. Stevens and her supervisor to discuss what is and isn't working with their instructional support time. Offering Ms. Stevens alternate methods of evaluation, such as peer observations, a supervisor change, and professional development opportunities will put her more at ease and let her know I hear her side and how distressing it can be to have somebody sit in the back of the room and watch you. I think she might be less combative and defensive if she sees me as an ally trying to support her as an educator rather than a supervisor evaluating her job performance, which is tied to her employment. I would explain to Mrs. Stevens my philosophy of incorporating professional learning, not just a one-day PD session, to help teachers adapt their teaching to the classroom environment. So it doesn't feel like a punishment that I'm the only, she's the only teacher that I'm asking to do this. It would be something well established in my building that all teachers are expected to continue to grow themselves as professionals. And just communicate to her that sometimes we fall, which is okay. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to not know how to, do everything. But as long as we're falling forward and not relying on old habits and methods to encounter new problems we face with students, which sometimes we experience that with teachers, that they want to do things the same way, the same time for 30 years of their career, and that is not okay. So I would communicate that caveat as I'm, proposing an option or a solution to help improve the situation. When implementing the decision, first I would meet with Miss Stevens, her supervisor. Sorry, I would meet with Mrs. Stevens' supervisor separately to get some insight into what has already been done, what's already been tried. Then meet with Mrs. Stevens and her supervisor together to have an organic discussion about how things can improve. I would need to address any attitude of unteachable behavior immediately at this point, if necessary, and right here at the onset, so that if it truly is a problem with unteachability with Mrs. Stevens, and no matter what I say or the supervisor says, we can deal with that right there, and I can just lay down an expectation of this is learning, and we're all learning, and we all need to be teachable. So that she understands my expectation for her to be teachable for the next 3 months. And then second, I would offer alternate evaluation methods for Mrs. Stevens for 3 months from now, such as peer observations. Ask Ms. Stevens to choose a PD one-day program on classroom management and engagement that looks interesting to her, and take a class that the district will pay for. Third, I would notify Ms. Stevens that I have not turned in the non-renewal form and wish to push the reset on her evaluations in order to work together to solve the problem for the betterment of her students. And then fourth, I would assist Mrs. Stevens with the classroom expectations meeting in her class with the students, so that they understand that disrespect and inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated, and make it clear to students that Mrs. Stevens and I are a united front, and address any kind of social emotional issues maybe happening at that time, maybe reteach students on appropriate classroom behavior if they've been out of the classroom for quite a while due to COVID, and kind of address any bad habits that need to be unlearned by the students and also by Ms. Stevens in the way that they engage with each other. And then finally, I will follow up with Mrs. Stevens early and often on how things are going. I will also talk to her about everyday life and things that have nothing to do with school, to better foster a building relationship, so that I am not perceived as merely a boss that determines her employment with the district, but a collaborative supporter of her success as a person first and a teacher second. And I think that that would be really good, since I've been struggling with having positive things to say to her. I really need to engage with her as a human first, and that might have a positive effect that overflows onto her students. These are my references from some research based on how to help teachers grow in their profession, and the best ways to engage with teachers and observe. Thanks.